Right now, most cities and states allow companies and municipalities to ask job applicants about their criminal histories. Supporters say that's needed to protect their businesses and properly screen people. But critics say that makes it even harder for people with criminal records to find jobs. Those people have started a movement called Ban the Box, and earlier this week I spoke with one of them, Patricia Worth of the Justice's Strategy Centers for Community Alternatives in Syracuse. So Patricia, this push to ban the box, to basically not incorporate past criminal history when somebody applies for a job, we've talked a lot about it on this program, but summarize again for me the arguments and why you're so strongly in favor of removing that as a qualification for employment.
Well, first of all, I want to clarify what Ban the Box is. Ban the Box is not telling employers or other decision makers that they can never ask about past conviction information. It's actually telling them to defer the inquiry until later in the application process, until after you've given an applicant an opportunity to prove themselves on their merits. Why is that important? Well, what we know in the United States now is that more and more people have been caught up in the criminal justice system, and hence more and more people have a past conviction on their record. And all too often, they're defined by that conviction. They're felons, they're ex-criminals, they're cons, they're criminals. And we've stripped away from that their humanity, their mothers, their fathers. We've stripped away all of those other humanizing characteristics. So they go to apply for a job. They check the box on the application, and right away, before the employer even looks at the rest of the application or their merits or their qualifications, takes that application and throws it out.
And it makes it that much more likely that the cycle will then repeat itself, because if somebody who has a past conviction can't get a job, well, what options do they have?
Exactly. And what we've seen is many people end up giving up. Because they know as soon as they check the box what exactly is going to happen to that application. So why apply?
So from an employer's standpoint, at what point would you say it is okay to ask about past criminal history?
In New York, I would say the best time to ask about it is after a conditional offer of employment has been made. So they've assessed the application, they brought the applicant in for an interview, they've talked to the applicant about his or her qualifications, they've got a feel for and built a rapport for the applicant, and they have a sense of, this is somebody we really like. At that point, they extend an offer to the applicant, conditioned upon doing a background check, do the background check, and then make a decision, is this something we need to be concerned about? But they've already had a chance to talk to the applicant and to really gauge who they are.
Would it be okay at that point for the employer to then cut ties with the prospective employee and say, you know, I'm sorry, you've got a criminal background? Or does it have to be particular to the job set that they would be employed for? So if somebody had embezzled money, that's not the person you want being the accountant for your firm, or would it be for any criminal violation?
No, under New York law, and actually federal law is very clear about this too, you can't automatically deny a person a job just because they have a conviction history. You need to determine if there's a relationship between their conviction history and the particular job duties, or hiring them would pose an unreasonable risk to people and property of the job site. New York actually gives employers 9 criteria or 9 factors that they have to consider in making this decision. And you know, my organization, we are an employer. We employ over 100 people, and we find that these factors are actually very helpful in guiding our decision making.
I used the example before about an accountant who had been convicted of embezzlement, or a candidate to become an accountant who had been convicted of embezzlement. What about somebody with a violent criminal past or a drug conviction in their past? Couldn't I, as an employer, say, boy, if that person has a history of violence, I don't want them around my employees because it might happen again? Or to a similar degree, boy, if that person has a history of drug abuse or drug sales or whatever the case may be, they're much more likely to relapse into that if I extend them a job, and then I'm in a difficult spot.
Well, actually, they're far less likely to recidivate if they have a job. Right? And so one way for an employer to think about it is, if I give people an opportunity to get jobs, and jobs very clearly, the research is very clear, is associated with desistance from crime, less likely to be involved in criminal activity. But is it true that people are more likely to, offend just because they have a conviction history? No, the reality is it's not true. That doesn't change depending on the crime. And there's been some very good research on this, that after a certain amount of time in the community, people with conviction histories are no more likely than the general population to re-engage in criminal activity. And that's especially true if they're given opportunities to live a law-abiding life.
And I'm sympathetic to that argument, but I'm trying to put myself in the position of an employment manager or somebody who would have hiring, firing sort of capabilities. And I'm sure some of them are going to say, well, doesn't this speak to character to a certain degree, which is a judgment that I need to make when I'm deciding whether to hire somebody or not?
Right.
Isn't that a way to, before I go through all of these different hoops, to get a sense of somebody's character?
And what I have found as an employer who's making these decisions is sometimes a person's past mistakes does inform their character and informs it actually in very positive ways. They've learned their lesson. They've developed strategies for making sure that something like that never happens again. They know better than anybody else the kinds of mistakes that you can make that get you sort of down the path of getting involved in crime. So if you have a chance to actually talk to an applicant, you do have that chance to make that character determination. But if you're automatically assuming poor moral character just because they're engaged in criminal conduct, you never have that chance to make that assessment.
And from a hiring efficiency standpoint, I know a lot of people who have or are in positions where they do hiring and firing, and boy, they'll tell you horror stories about how long and drawn out the process is and how hard it is to find the right candidate.
Right.
And I can already hear complaints saying, well, this is just going to make the process extend that much further, because now I've gone this far with somebody only to find out that they've got a criminal background, and now I have to make a determination where I could have made that determination much earlier in the process.
But you can't make that determination much earlier in the process if you haven't had a chance to talk to the applicant, right? And consider the factors that the law requires you to consider. Again, like I said, we're an employer too, and we banned the box about 6 years ago. We actually found that it streamlined our hiring process because we don't do as many background checks. We wait until after we've extended a conditional offer, and then we've had a chance to talk to the applicant.
Patricia, I got about 30 seconds. What would you like to see happen legislatively in the state of New York? Or should this be voluntary by companies?
A lot of companies have opted in, including major retailers, and just the other day, the Coke Industries. But I do think that the state needs to take some leadership, and so I would like to see legislation on banning the box across the state.
Patricia Worth, thank you so much for the conversation. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Take a break. Up next, our Hudson Valley headlines.